Welcome to Therapy Shorts 51. Therapy Shorts is bite-sized psychology and insights that you can take anywhere with you. And today we're looking at one of the most romanticized ideas in modern relationships, and one of the most clinically misleading. We complete each other. If you have codependent tendencies, if you grew up adapting to others, or if your identity formed around being useful, pleasing, or stable for everyone but yourself, this idea can feel incredibly comforting. It feels like you belong. It feels like relief. And it sounds like the end of the loneliness. But clinically, it points to something very different. And today we're going to look at this because this myth doesn't just shape how you love. It shapes how you disappear. So let's take a deeper look at that. If someone completes you, they also have the power to erase you. This isn't being a soulmate. It's an attachment wound searching for a familiar structure. So what if you complete me isn't romance, but an attachment-based adaptation? Let's look at that theory. When a client says to me they feel complete in a relationship, I don't hear romance. I hear developmental interruption. I hear adaptive functioning. I hear a self that never had the space to fully form. Most securely attached people don't fantasize about completion. They seek companionship, mutuality, not identity replacement. But for individuals who grew up in inconsistent or emotionally demanding environments, their self, that is the me self, didn't receive enough attunement to become stable. So instead, they developed an adaptive self. And this adaptive self is the one who monitors emotional climates, manages other people's reactions, preemptively adapts, takes responsibility that doesn't belong to them, suppresses internal cues, and internalizes guilt for having needs. Clinically, this is protective. It kept the child connected to the caregivers who couldn't fully attune to them. But it comes with a predictable adult consequence. You become highly skilled at relational maintenance and profoundly disconnected from yourself. And that disconnection creates a vulnerability. The moment someone appears capable of offering structure or intensity, it feels like completion. But it's not completion, it's compensation. So why does this completion myth feel so psychologically regulating? Let's look at the nervous system. For individuals raised in environments marked by unpredictability, inconsistent affection, emotional volatility, subtle neglect, parentification, the nervous system adapts by scanning for relational cues at all times. This leads to sympathetic activation, or hypervigilance, fawn responses, external orientation, what do they feel, what do they need, difficulty identified in personal internal states, merging as a regulation strategy. So when someone enters a relationship and feels completed, what's actually happening is their nervous system momentarily stops scanning. Fusion calms the system, but only temporarily. It feels like finally being anchored, finally having some direction, finally having an identity, and finally not needing to self-regulate. This is why intensity or chaos feels like connection, why inconsistency feels like chemistry, why caretaking feels like purpose, and why emotional labor feels like identity. Your body isn't responding to compatibility, it's responding to familiarity. And healthy, emotionally consistent partners, they don't activate the adaptive self. So the system reads them as boring, flat, no spark, emotionally inert. The absence of activation gets misread as the absence of connection. Clinically, that's one of the core struggles in codependent adaptation. So if you disappear into the relationship, how can a we self exist? Many people confuse fusion with intimacy. Closeness equals sameness. Love equals self-abandonment. Harmony equals silence. Connection equals merging. But in relational psychology, intimacy requires differentiation. A we self is the relational space created by two autonomous individuals, a third entity that emerges only when two people maintain emotional boundaries, identity continuity, stable self-structures, the ability to self-regulate, and internal authority. A we self cannot form when one partner regulates the entire relationship, One becomes the emotional scaffolding for both. One suppresses needs to avoid conflict. One merges to maintain attachment. And one carries the psychological workload. In fusion, the relationship becomes a merger, not a partnership. In a merger, the more compliant partner loses their center. The more dominant partner loses accountability. Intimacy is replaced by role-based functioning. Resentment accumulates beneath connection. The relationship stabilizes through imbalance. Clinically, that's not closeness, it's structural collapse. So what happens clinically when someone is allowed to complete you? Let's break down the consequences. Identity diffusion. The person becomes an extension of the partner's needs rather than an expression of their own internal world. Self-silencing. Internal cues, emotions, preferences, boundaries are overridden in favour of relational preservation. Emotional overfunctioning. They become responsible for the emotional equilibrium of the relationship, creating chronic fatigue and burnout. Attachment distortion. The partner becomes a stand-in for internal self-regulation, creating dependency instead of connection. Intimacy impairment. True intimacy requires two selves. When one disappears, the relational field collapses. And quiet grief. Perhaps the saddest clinical consequence is this. Even when loved, the person feels unseen, because their partner never met the self they hid in order to maintain the relationship. So how do we rebuild the me-self without losing connection? This is the heart of the therapeutic process with codependence. Rebuilding the me-self involves noticing internal sensations and working with them, defining where you end and others begin, naming emotions in real time, slowing down fusion tendencies, allowing discomfort without self-erasure, and identifying adaptive versus authentic self-states. People often need to learn that conflict is not abandonment, disagreement is not danger, personal needs are not a burden, self-expression is not selfish, and saying I is not a threat to we. And as the me-self strengthens, something important becomes possible. A genuine we-self, not fusion, not compensation, a relational field between two stable, differentiated adults. This is a shift from survival-based relating to self-read relating. This week, your task is simple but transformative. Notice one moment each day where your adaptive self takes the lead. Name it, slow it down, and ask, what would my me-self do here, even by 1%? This is how structural change begins, not with dramatic transformation, which isn't sustainable, but with quiet daily corrections that slowly rebuild the internal architecture of the self. Thank you for listening, and thank you for the work you're doing. Your relationships will definitely change when you change the self you bring to them. I'll see you in the next Therapy Shorts.